The House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., February 1st, 2024. I hereby appoint the Honorable Brandon Williams to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer will be offered by the guest chaplain, Dr. Michael Kramer, New Life Church, Osceola, Indiana.
Holy Heavenly Father, Creator and Sustainer of this universe, you have given us the greatest nation in the world to care for as stewards of your people, your resources, and your land. Forgive us of our shortcomings. You have assembled these specific representatives here today to fulfill a precise purpose in your sovereign eternal plan. You tell us that blessed is the nation whose God is you. You tell us you give wisdom freely to all who ask. So we call on you today for your wisdom and the matters to be discussed and determined. We look to you today for unity. We draw on your strength. We ask for your grace and mercy to accomplish all things in a manner that is pleasing to you. We yield all things to your complete and sovereign will and pray this in the name of your eternal Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
The chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House the approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 1, Rule 1, I demand a vote on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal.
The question is on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no. The ayes have it. The journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I object to the vote on the ground that a quorum is not present and make a point of order that a quorum is not present.
Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia.
Please join me in the pledge today. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Without objection, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Yocum, is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize our guest chaplain, my dear friend, Dr. Michael Kramer, who serves as lead pastor at my home church, New Life Baptist Church in Osceola, Indiana. Dr. Kramer earned degrees from Word of Life Bible Institute, Moody Bible Institute, Liberty Theological Seminary, and Grace Theological Seminary. My parents began attending the church when I was just 1 year old, and my earliest childhood memories are with the Kramer family. My wife and I were there when he married the love of his life, Jamie, and we celebrated the arrival of their 3 children, Bella, Mia, and Ethan. And I stood next to him as a pallbearer at the funeral of his 28-year-old brother, Joseph. Mr. Speaker, I and so many others in Indiana's 2nd District will forever be grateful for the impact that Dr. Michael Kramer has had on us as individuals as well as the kingdom of God. Thank you, and I yield back.
The chair will entertain up to 5 further requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Oklahoma seek recognition? Without objection. Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to a remarkable American.
Gentlemen will suspend. Does the gentleman seek unanimous consent to address the House?
Gentlemen, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to consent and revise my remarks if possible.
Without objection. The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to pay tribute to a remarkable American, Hope Allison Dabney, To all who knew her, Hope's infectious smile and warm demeanor impacted the lives of so many. Hope was a cherished daughter, sister, cousin, niece, granddaughter, and friend. She was a dedicated gymnast, a talented singer, a skillful pole vaulter, a fierce Auburn football fan, and hundreds of other things. As a testament to Hope's character, she volunteered at River Edge, a nonprofit organization in Georgia that provides mental health and substance use disorder treatment, as well as services for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. The news of her passing after just 26 years of age has left many hearts broken across the country. May we find solace in the knowledge that her spirit lives on in the hearts of those she touched. May Hope's legacy inspire acts of kindness and warmth, echoing the love and friendliness that defines her time with us so many years in this world we have today. My wife Tammy and I, along with the staff of Oklahoma's 1st Congressional District, unite in prayer for the Dabney family and all those who were blessed to know Hope. And I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Alabama seek recognition?
Rise to ask for consent to speak for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the extraordinary life and legacy of Dr. Fred Prim, who passed away on January 19, 2024, at the age of 57. Dr. Prim was a true Renaissance man. He was an educator, Air Force Naval reservist, pastor, teacher, coach, adjunct professor, consultant, a Kappa man, and the superintendent for Sumter County Schools and Bessemer City Schools. Dr. Prim was truly a respected and beloved community leader. Educated at Alabama A&M, Auburn, and Nova Southeastern, Dr. Prim was a true servant leader, and he led in every aspect of his life. He made his commitment to serving others his life's top priority, and serve he did. Our community and the lives of his students are the better because of him. His life is a true testament to the transformational power of education. I ask my colleagues to join me in celebrating the exceptional life and legacy of Dr. Fred Prim. May his family find comfort in knowing that his legacy will live on in the many lives that he touched. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to share the story of Zeev and Gally Berman. Zeev and Gally were 26-year-old twin brothers. And like many twin brothers with that special bond, they do everything together. They work as light technicians in the same sound and light company. They root for the same soccer team, and they do everything together, including traveling the world. They were also tragically two of more than 240 men, women, children, and elderly who were brutally kidnapped by Hamas terrorists on October 7th. For 118 days now, Zeev and Gally have endured unspeakable horrors at the hands of their Hamas captors in Gaza. For 118 days, they've had to summon the incredible courage to hope, not sure if they will ever see their home and family again. So I rise today not only to share their story, but also to demand that Hamas release Zeev and Gally immediately, along with the more than 130 hostages remaining in Gaza. Israel has acted in good faith during the ongoing negotiations. They have shown they are serious about a pause in fighting so hostages can be returned home. It's past time to bring Zeev and Gally home. It's past time to bring them all home. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, we are witnessing the barbaric consequences of the draconian laws that extreme MAGA Republicans are imposing on the state of Texas. Over 26,000 women have become pregnant after being raped since Texas outlawed abortion with no exceptions. Let me repeat that, 26,000 women. This could be your daughter, sister, cousin, niece, or mother. Experienced sexual assault is one of the hardest things that a woman can heal from. Greg Abbott and Texas Republicans submitted a mission to trap women, destroy their plans and goals, and ultimately chain them to their trauma for the rest of their lives. No woman should be shamed for what they have been through. I will continue to fight for reproductive rights and make sure that no woman should be afraid to make the decisions that are right for her. I will always fight for people over politics. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House and ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, since being sworn into office, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas has failed in his duty to keep our nation safe. In December, more than 300,000 illegal immigrants crossed into our country. By using so-called parole to allow millions of illegal immigrants into the United States, and by ending the Remain in Mexico policy, Secretary Mayorkas has manufactured a national security disaster. This crisis isn't just contained to Texas and Arizona. The deadly drugs like fentanyl that have poured into our nation on Secretary Mayorkas' watch have made each and every state a border state. It is clear that Secretary Mayorkas is unfit to hold office, that his inaction has cost Americans dearly. It has cost American lives. It is time for this Congress to impeach Secretary Mayorkas for his failure to uphold the law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise or extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 1 year ago this weekend, my constituents in Beaver County and our East Palestine neighbors lived through Norfolk Southern's disastrous train derailment. They caused a massive toxic fireball, and we're frankly lucky that no one died. Since then, what has Congress done to protect our communities, to make freight rails safer? Absolutely nothing. Folks in Western Pennsylvania are sick and tired of being treated like collateral damage in the way of corporate profits. And those railroad profits have not been shabby. From 2018 to last year, Norfolk Southern enriched their shareholders with $18 billion. My bill, Railway Safety Act, supported by the Biden administration and former President Trump, and will make rail safer. This shouldn't be partisan. Along with my Democratic colleagues, I'm joined by 9 Republican co-sponsors, and yet nothing has changed. The railroads are acting like they run the show like it's the 19th century. It's time for politicians to stop carrying their water, to stop treating my constituents and our neighbors like fodder. We need action, Mr. Speaker. It's time to pass the Railway Safety Act. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Request permission to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to congratulate the winners of this year's Virginia 5th District Congressional App Challenge. Every year, middle and high school students submit their applications to participate in the Congressional App Challenge, a complex competition where students interested in STEM code an application of their preference. Adrian Park, Sean Fu, and Emmett Lack from Albemarle High School produced an extraordinary app called Illness IQ to help individuals detect and diagnose medical symptoms without having to see a doctor. After tragically losing a close friend to heart disease, Adrian and his classmates were inspired to develop a tool to access critical medical information in a user-friendly app. The app meets a significant need in the healthcare marketplace using intricate technology, pre-gathered scientific data, and user input to diagnose individual symptoms with a 97% success rate. I commend Adrian, Sean, and Emmett for their hard work in creating this innovative app, and I encourage them to continue excelling in their academic and professional pursuits. I'm honored to represent these outstanding students in the 5th District of Virginia, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
And I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker,
Our nation's southern border and immigration systems are dysfunctional, and it's been this way for decades, under multiple presidents, under multiple houses and senates, under both parties. Hundreds of thousands of people across our border every month. Our immigration courts are understaffed with an immense backlog of cases. And much of the fentanyl crossing the border comes through legal points of entry, 95% of which is brought by legal residents. Where do we go from here? We have to find real bipartisan solutions for a secure border and a healthy, humane immigration process. While our colleagues in the Senate seek solutions to both, our House Republican majority seeks solutions to neither. They would rather keep this issue alive, scare their supporters, and serve the shadow government of the former president. In the face of progress, they're stalling, orchestrating a sham impeachment rather than making real policy, policies that could ensure a better funded border patrol, up-to-date fentanyl detection technology, well-staffed courts, and an immigration system that supports those seeking asylum, refuge, and opportunity, the very story and value of our nations. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
To speak for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to commemorate the life and legacy of one of San Fernando Valley's great sons, Richie Valens, on the 65th anniversary of his tragic death known as the day music died. Richard Stephen Valenzuela, better known as Richie Valens, was born in my hometown of Pacoima, California in 1941. Richie was only 17 when songs like Come On Let's Go, Donna, and La Bamba topped the charts. They defined an era of rock and roll music and opened the doors for future Latino artists all across our country. On February 3rd, 1959, Richie Valens, Buddy Holly, and the Big Bopper tragically lost their lives in a plane crash. Richie Valens' legacy lives on in his music, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and public spaces like the Pacoima Post Office and a member of Congress whose name was inspired by Richie. Richie Valens is an example of the amazing talent that exists in our community. His legacy will continue to be a source of pride for the entire San Fernando Valley for generations to come. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gotcha. For what purpose does the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore, seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to House Resolution 980, I call up Bill H.R. 6976, the Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act, and ask that for its immediate consideration in the House.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
Union Calendar Number 292, H.R. 6976. A bill to amend the Immigration and Nationality Act to provide that aliens who have been convicted of or who have committed an offense for driving while intoxicated or impaired are inadmissible and deportable.
Pursuant to House Resolution 980, in lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 118-22 is adopted, and the bill is, as amended is considered read. The bill, as amended, shall be debatable for 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. After 1 hour of debate, it shall be in order to consider the further amendment printed in Part D of House Report 118-362, if offered by the member designate in the report, which shall be considered read, shall be separately debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, and shall not be subject to the demand for division of the question. The gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore, and the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, each will control 30 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous materials on H.R. 6976.
Without objection.
I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every 45 minutes, that is how often someone in the United States dies in a crash involving an alcohol-impaired driver. In 2021 alone, there were 13,384 alcohol-impaired driving fatalities. In the same year, drunk driving crashes led to nearly 400,000 injuries. Those crashes don't discriminate. The victim could be me, it could be you, it could be one of our family members. This issue hits close to home for me. There was a newlywed couple from my hometown of Enterprise, Alabama, named Angel and Jeremy C. I knew them personally. Angel and Jeremy were riding a motorcycle together when out of nowhere, an illegal alien, under the influence of alcohol, collided into their newlyweds with his pickup. Their lives were cut dramatically short. Sadly, tragedies like this are not uncommon across our country. Consider this case from Missouri, where just 2 months ago, an illegal alien from Honduras was sentenced for driving drunk at 100 miles per hour and killing a man. Now, if you listen to the Democrat colleagues, or listen to my Democratic colleagues, you may think drunk driving is no big deal. In fact, at a Judiciary Committee markup in 2021, my Democratic colleagues voted down 3 Republican amendments that would have made certain aliens ineligible for green cards if they had 1, 2, or even 10 or more DUI convictions. But that should come as no surprise. In 2020, then candidate Joe Biden said that illegal aliens with DUI convictions should be allowed to stay in the United States. Biden asserted that I should not arrest aliens with drunk driving convictions because you only arrest for the purpose of dealing with felonies that are committed. I don't count drunk driving as a felony. Candidate Biden even called for ICE officers to be fired if they arrested aliens without felony convictions. To President Biden and my Democratic colleagues, today we say absolutely not. If you're a guest in this country, you drive drunk, you should be removed from our country, period. Instead of hearing agreement on this from Democrats today, we will hear these far-fetched hypotheticals and accusations that this bill is cruel and too broad. But instead of engaging in hypotheticals, let's again revisit the facts. Drunk drivers involved in 31% of all crash deaths in this country. On average, drunk driving has killed nearly 11,000 people in the United States every year from 2012 to 2021. Yet, immigration laws do not explicitly make aliens inadmissible or removable if they drive drunk or recklessly break our laws. H.R. 6976 changes that, and it creates safer streets and safer communities for all of us. I urge my colleagues to support the Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this bill is just another page from the majority's tired old playbook of inventing perceived gaps in the law and providing overbroad legislation to quote-unquote fix them. DUIs are a serious problem. Over 13,000 people died in alcohol-impaired driving traffic deaths in 2021, and all of those deaths were preventable. But instead of working on proven solutions like improving access to public transportation and ride-sharing programs so that people have alternatives to driving drunk, Republicans are laying the blame for the problem at the feet of immigrants. Now, let me be clear. No one here wants to see individuals who are true threats to public safety eligible for immigration benefits. But our immigration laws already exclude public safety threats from being able to get visas or legally remain in the country. Under our current laws, this includes those who have committed serious DUI offenses. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, a non-citizen who is convicted of or admits to committing a crime involving moral turpitude, or a CIMT, is generally inadmissible. Likewise, a non-citizen who is convicted of a CIMT, where a sentence of 1 year or longer may be imposed, is deportable. There is substantial case law demonstrating that serious DUI offenses are considered CIMTs under current law. DUI, where the maximum possible penalty is a year or more, and where there is serious bodily harm, hit and runs, aggravated DUI, and a DUI involving driving with knowledge of an invalid, suspended, or revoked license are all CIMTs and are therefore already deportable offenses. This means that under current law, the people who are drinking and driving and putting people at risk of harm are already removable. But the majority is not satisfied with this. They want to deport everyone who has ever received any conviction for any DUI offense. Here's the problem with this approach. Every state has a different standard for how they define and prosecute DUIs. Some states will charge people with a DUI even if they are not actually driving a car. For example, prosecutors in Virginia convicted a man of DUI who was inebriated and asleep in the driver's seat of his car with the keys in the ignition so he could listen to music in his driveway. This case, in which the driver never even left his driveway or even turned his car all the way on, went all the way to the Virginia Supreme Court. We cannot rely on prosecutorial discretion in this type of case. Under current law, the man in this case would not ultimately be subject to removal based on this conviction if he was a non-citizen. But if this bill were to be enacted, such conviction would lead to the deportation of even a long-standing green card holder. If this bill fixed, and remember, we're talking here about long-standing green card holders, not illegal aliens, people who entered the country legally, who may have been here for 20 or 30 years, who have American citizen spouses and children. And if this bill were enacted, such a conviction of sleeping in your own car, inebriated, in your own driveway, going nowhere, would get you deported. If this bill fixed a serious gap in the law, I would be supportive. But this bill doesn't do that. It puts people who are here legally at risk of removal for making even a minor mistake that harmed no one. All at a time when our immigration courts have historic backlogs and Republicans are refusing to provide DHS with the resources it needs to enforce the laws currently on the books. This is purely for show, but I would expect nothing less from a party that has admitted they would rather wait to fix the problems in our immigration system so that President Trump can preserve the issue for his campaign than actually work towards meaningful reform now. I urge members to oppose this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, Democrats want to pretend that this bill is extreme, cruel, and harsh, as if imposing consequences on aliens for breaking our laws is somehow unheard of. Yet guess who also bar entry and deports drunk drivers? Canada. That's correct. In at least this one particular area, our liberal friends to the north get it right. And of course they do, because it just makes sense. If you're a guest in a country and you drive drunk or impaired, you shouldn't be allowed to stay here as we wait for you to do it again or to kill or seriously injure someone. Let's pass H.R. 6976 today and make these sensible changes. At this point, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from Florida for 4 minutes, Mr. Posey.
The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman from Alabama for yielding and for bringing forth this great bill to protect Americans. Over the last few days, I've heard more lies about the immigration crisis at our southern border than any other issue since Obamacare. You remember Obamacare? We promised that you could keep your own insurance company, promised you could keep your own doctor, promised it would cost less, all lies, but the lies about immigration are even greater this year. This week I heard a member cross the aisle in an apparent theatric and disingenuous gesture of goodwill, falsely refer to me as being his friend, as he hurled lie after lie, denigrating my colleagues and me. Although I do have friends on the other side of the aisle, that's not my kind of friend. He hurled lie after lie and insult after insult as he theatrically appealed to those listening or watching on this House floor, which incidentally is against the rules of the House, and I'm surprised the Speaker did not call him out of order. As he referred to my colleagues and I as MAGA Republican extremists. You know, some people, they're called Trump-phobics. They can't say Trump's name without Republican extremists attached to it. And claimed that we didn't want to solve the crisis at the border, calling anyone who wants our country to have a secure border a MAGA Republican extremist is not only a clear sign of acute Trump-phobia, but clear evidence of just how out of touch some people are with the overwhelming majority of Americans, and reality for that matter. There may be some, however, I don't know them, Republicans, Democrats, or Independents who actually believe that when somebody breaks into your home, that they're entitled to become a member of your family. How about being honest here for a change? He knew, I know, everyone knows, even the most challenged Trump-phobics know, that despite President Biden's and Secretary Mayorkas' numerous fantasy denials, there has in fact been a crisis at our southern border, and it began when the president took office. Now our president finally acknowledges that we have a border crisis and said he will fix it, but only if we give him more money to more quickly process more illegals. That will not fix the crisis at the border. The bizarre proposal that the border can be secured while still allowing 5,000 illegals a day to invade our country is like claiming it's possible to be half pregnant. You have a right to stand with the drug cartels, but I and the rest of the MAGA Republicans stand with Texas and the United States of America. The sovereignty of our nation, the safety and security of American communities is not up for negotiation. It can only be fixed by the president reversing his executive orders that created the invasion in the first place, or the adoption of H.R. 2. In the meantime, I'm more than happy to support Congressman Moore's H.R. 6976 to save American lives. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I reserve. The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I now yield so much time as she may consume to the distinguished gentlelady from Washington, the ranking Democrat on the Immigration Subcommittee, Representative Jayapal.
The gentlewoman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in strong opposition to H.R. 6976. Once again, the majority is wasting our time by putting forward a piece of legislation that has zero chance of becoming law and that is extraordinarily broad. No one condones driving under the influence. We should do everything we can to prevent people from getting behind the wheel while intoxicated. But this bill, designed to scapegoat and denigrate immigrants, will not solve the serious problem of DUIs. Public safety threats, including those who have been convicted of serious DUI offenses, are already inadmissible and removable under the Immigration and Nationality Act, and this bill would not change or enhance that. Under the INA, a conviction of a crime involving moral turpitude, where the punishment can be for a year or longer, makes an individual deportable. Courts have ruled over and over again that serious DUI offenses that put others at risk are CIMTs and make the perpetrators deportable. But this bill isn't about serious offenses, Mr. Speaker. Far from it. The bill says that a conviction for a single DUI offense, misdemeanor or felony, makes you instantly deportable, and an admission to such an offense makes you instantly inadmissible, no questions asked. I can understand maybe the appeal of something that sounds like a zero-tolerance policy, but let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, if we had that kind of policy here in the House of Representatives, there would be several members that would not be members of this chamber. Moreover, by including every single type of DUI offense, this bill would make someone deportable for not driving under the influence. That's because states have a wide variety of opinions on what is a DUI. For example, Arizona's DUI statute allows people to be charged with a DUI if they are intoxicated and have, quote, physical control of their vehicle. The Ninth Circuit found that the breadth of this statute means that, and I'm quoting here, one may be convicted under it for sitting in one's own car, in one's own driveway, with the key in the ignition and a bottle of beer in one's hand, end quote. Because of this, the Ninth Circuit determined that a conviction under this statute was insufficient to count as a deportable offense. As the court put it, drunken driving is despicable. Having physical control of a car while drinking is not. Their words, not mine. As many places across the country experienced cold spells in the last week or so, there are states that would allow prosecution of someone simply if they were sitting in their car with the heat on while inebriated, even if it was in their own driveway. Current law allows judges to use their discretion to look at the broader facts of the case. This bill would strip that discretion away from them and would mandate that even someone whose only crime was sitting in a parked car while inebriated must be deported. Let's not forget that deportability grounds like this, the one that this bill would create, impact immigrants who are here lawfully, those who my colleagues always like to say came the right way. By the way, Mr. Speaker, I'm one of those. I came here to this country at 16 years old. It took me 17 years to get my citizenship, and here I am as a proud member of the United States House of Representatives. Are we really saying that we think the best use of our very limited federal government resources is to work on deporting a green card holder who decided to sleep in their car rather than drive home drunk from a bar? A green card holder not trying to drive drunk, just trying to stay warm? I certainly don't think that's a good use of our resources. It's certainly not a good use of our time on this floor. But my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have made it clear that they're not interested in sensible solutions, just in sensationalism. This bill is another example of that. And I hope my colleagues will stop referring to people as illegals. People are human beings. They have different statuses. Some are undocumented. If you want to say some are illegal, but let's not call human beings illegal. Tired of that language. I urge my colleagues to reject this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I recognize former law enforcement officer and a good friend of ours from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber, for 5 minutes.
The gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. President Biden today, by executive order, can end catch and release, cease the exploitation of the parole authority, reinstate remain in Mexico, expand expedited removal authority, and renew building the wall. By executive order, Mr. Chair, he can do that, which will stop the illegal immigration by 80%. Just those executive orders. And he can do that today. Mr. Speaker, I am horrified and I am dismayed. We have been shouting from the rooftops that the border is in crisis for years. And finally, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are beginning to acknowledge there is a problem. Just in time for an election. How shocking. Just like when they switched from defund the police to pro-police rhetoric in 2022, just before the election. They have this playbook down pat. Since the president has taken office, Mr. Chair, there have been over 7 million illegal crossings at our southern border. Over 8.3 million illegal crossings nationwide. And yes, that's right. Our southern border is in such disarray and has sucked up so much of our resources that our northern border is wide open and the cartels are taking advantage, including in the state of New York. My esteemed colleague who's claiming time on the other side of the aisle, his state is in desperate need of help, taking over their cities, overrunning their public safety, overrunning their schools, overrunning their social services. And he stands up here, Mr. Chair, says there's nothing wrong. This crisis is personal, and it is impacting the safety and security of my constituents. In 2022, Minnesota resort owners along the Canadian border in Minnesota caught illegal immigrants trespassing on their property. And last fall, a young girl in Bemidji, Minnesota was sexually assaulted, and there were found 11 illegal immigrants were found at the scene. And just last week, Mr. Chair, authorities arrested an al-Shabaab terrorist in Minneapolis. The terrorist was caught at the southern border 1 year prior and released back into our country by the Biden administration's and catch and release. Allowed him to roam for 1 year in this country. And it's alleged, Mr. Chair, that he was trading in illegal arms. I fear it's only a matter of time before another September 11th occurs on our soil, and we must not let that happen. If Democrats were serious about making our border secure, they'd encourage their colleagues in the Senate to pass the already House bill H.R. 2, the strongest worded piece of legislation on our border in this country's history. They can get it to his desk immediately for President Biden to sign. Or they would call on the president to use his executive authorities, as I already stated, to reinstate President Trump policies that were keeping our nation safe. But they are not serious. So yes, I'm here today to beg my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to vote for this bill that would make illegal immigrants convicted of a DUI deportable or inadmissible to our country. Because of my law enforcement background, Mr. Speaker, I am probably one of a very few members of Congress who has ever been to the scene of a drunk driving accident where there was a death. One of very few who has delivered death notices to unsuspecting families or victims. And I pray that none of you ever have to deliver or receive such heartbreaking news. At a minimum, Mr. Chair, we should keep illegal immigrants who drive under the influence of alcohol and put people's lives in danger out of this country. And to my Democratic colleagues, I ask, get on the side of public safety and law enforcement all of the time, not just during election years. This is an easy vote, and I ask my colleagues to do the right thing and vote yes on H.R. 6976, and I yield back.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker, I'll yield 2 minutes to our friend from Utah, Mr. Curtis.
The gentleman from Utah, Mr. Curtis, is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 6976, the Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act. I've personally been to the southern border and seen the crisis firsthand. And I don't care your political persuasion, all of us know what's happening down there is wrong and needs to be corrected. The first duty of the federal government is to protect American citizens, and this cannot be done without securing our border. I'm pleased that the House is taking the steps this week to do so. It is not clear under current law that individuals illegally in this country can be deported for driving while intoxicated. This legislation would ensure any non-citizen convicted of or admitting to driving under the influence would no longer be allowed to remain in the United States. This shouldn't be controversial. When you drive drunk, you are putting your neighbors and the broader community at unacceptable risk, and that we cannot allow. Also this week, we passed legislation that would allow law enforcement to prosecute criminals who intentionally refuse to stop for Border Patrol agents. The practice of running from Border Patrol agents is dangerous for residents, patrol officers, and the fugitive. I hold deep compassion for those who are in circumstances that they feel the need to enter the United States illegally. However, we are a country of laws and need to ensure that individuals know they need to enter the United States only through the legal manners. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back.
I reserve.
You reserve? Mr. Speaker, I recognize my friend from Texas for 1 minute. I yield to Mr. Self.
The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Self, is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 6976, the Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act. I'll be on the border Saturday, yet again, and it is a total mess. Illegal aliens continue to surge through the southern border and are overwhelming many states, to include those from the other side of the aisle. In addition to the fentanyl overdoses and cartel violence, drunk driving has been a major issue that has senselessly taken too many American lives. Last year, 52-year-old Special Olympian Craig Shimming was hit and killed in a car wreck on his way to church by an illegal alien drunk and high on meth. Devastating stories like this happen far too often across our country. And there is absolutely no reason illegal aliens with DUI convictions should be able to stay in the United States. The Protect Our Communities from DUIs Act would deport illegal aliens who have been convicted or committed the offense of driving while drunk or impaired. This is common sense legislation, and every member of the People's House should support this bill. I yield back.
I reserve, Mr. Speaker. Is the gentleman from Alabama ready to close?
I would inform the gentleman that we do not have any additional speakers, and I'm prepared to close. I reserve the balance of my time.
I'm prepared to close.
The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself the balance of my time.
The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, the last few speakers on the Republican side spent most of their time not addressing this bill, but addressing the general crisis at our southern border. The fact is there is a crisis. We all know that. The fact is that one of the major problems, and Republicans say this all the time and they're right, is catch and release. Someone is caught, or more usually turns himself in to a Border Patrol officer, claims asylum, and is given a court date 4 years, 5 years down the road. Why? Because we do not have enough asylum officers. We do not have enough asylum judges. President Biden requested $14 billion to increase the number of Border Patrolmen and women, to increase the number of asylum judges and immigration judges, so that you wouldn't have catch and release, so that people who claimed asylum would have their cases adjudicated in weeks, not in years, and those who are entitled to asylum would be admitted to the country and could work, and those not could be swiftly removed, deported from the country. But do our Republican colleagues want to do that? No. They don't want to give the president the means of alleviating this problem. They want a campaign issue. And they were very open about it. You have in the Senate painstakingly negotiated an extraordinarily conservative, so we hear, I haven't seen the text yet, but we hear an extraordinarily conservative and strong immigration bill, negotiated by such liberals as Senator Langford and Senator Graham, and they're going to pass it in all likelihood. But the Republicans in the House say, we won't even look at it. Why? Because the president, the former president, President Trump, said, don't pass anything, I want a campaign issue. They don't want to solve the problem. They want to keep the problem going as a campaign issue, and they've said it themselves. So don't get up here and talk about the problems of the southern border when you won't give this president any of the authority or the means that he seeks to deal with it. And when you say, as Speaker Johnson said, you're not going to even look at the bill from the Senate because it isn't perfect. Since when do we insist on perfect legislation? Now, Mr. Speaker, let's get to this bill. DUIs are a serious problem, and no one who poses a threat to public safety should be eligible for immigration benefits. But that is already the case under current law. This legislation is a gross overreach that would lead to absurd consequences and deportation for people who pose no threat to our country, such as the examples we heard of someone who, rather than driving drunk, is in his own car, inebriated, with the key turned on, listening to music in his own driveway, posing a threat to no one. And that would lead, even for people who have been here many years, of American citizen spouses and children, that would lead to automatic deportation, while doing nothing that our laws do not already do to deter people from driving under the influence. Driving under the influence as opposed to sitting in their driveway under the influence. I urge members to oppose this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Alabama is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to respond to my colleagues on the left. First, my colleagues across the aisle say that it's a campaign issue, that we're trying to make this a campaign issue. It is not. They made it a campaign issue. When Joe Biden came in day one and did away with the Remain in Mexico policy, when they started this catch and release program, and now they're saying they need more money, it's the executive orders that have created a problem on the U.S. southern border. I've been there a number of times, 3 times to be exact. And Sheriff Daniels told us, he said, the best he'd ever seen the border in 2018 was under Donald Trump. The worst he's ever seen it was then, and that was before the recent 200,000 people came across last month. To get up here and say that the administration needs more money or that they need some law, no. Biden has every tool in the toolbox to shut the U.S. southern border down, and he's continued to create crises for our communities. And this government is so good often at setting the building on fire and then wanting to fund the fire department. We don't need more money. We just need to apply the laws that are on the books and shut this flow down across this border before more and more people get killed and injured in these accidents we're talking about. And so the Democrats would prefer to engage in these outlandish hypotheticals and make light of driving under the influence rather than protect American communities from dangerous drivers. Again, here are some facts. According to the Mothers Against Drunk Driving, most drunk driver offenders drive at least 80 times drunk before they're arrested. Additionally, a 2014 article detailed how more than 1/3 of the individuals who are convicted of driving under influence are repeat offenders. To protect our communities from DUIs Act ensures that aliens who drive drunk can be removed from the United States after their first conviction, not after the 10th, not after they kill or seriously injure a child of yours or mine or a grandchild. Instead of spending time on a 50-state survey of DUI laws to formulate some far-fetched hypotheticals, I encourage my colleagues to grapple with the consequences of drunk driving and support this common-sense bill. And with that, sir, I'll yield back.
And yields. The gentleman from New York. All time for debate on the bill has expired. The chair understands that amendment number 1 will not be offered. Pursuant to the rule, the previous question is ordered. The question is on engrossment and third reading of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Third reading.
A bill to amend the Immigration and Nationality Act to provide that aliens who have been convicted of or have committed an offense for driving while intoxicated or impaired are inadmissible and deportable.
The question is on passage of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table.
Yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote. Pursuant to Clause 9 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the passage of the bill will be followed by a 5-minute vote on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal, if ordered. This is a 15-minute vote.
voting? Does any member wish to change a vote? Of this vote, the yeas are 274, the nays are 150. The bill is passed. Without objection, a motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is in the question on agreeing to the Speaker's approval of the journal, which the Chair will put de novo. The question is on agreeing on the Speaker's approval of the journal. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, the ayes have it, and the journal stands approved. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New York seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, we re-adjourn to meet at noon on Monday next for morning hour debate and 2 p.m. for legislative business.
Without objection. The Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. I write to notify you that pursuant to New York State law, I have tendered my resignation as a representative in Congress for the 26th Congressional District of the State of New York to the Secretary of State of the State of New York, effective at the end of the calendar day on February 2nd, 2024. Signed sincerely, Brian Higgins.
Order. Right here? Okay. The Chair will now entertain requests for 1-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Virginia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House floor for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute. Order.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the life and memory of E. Philip Hickman of Virginia's Eastern Shore. Born in July of 1952, Phil grew up in northern Accomack County, graduating from Atlantic High School. He attended Virginia Tech, studying agriculture economics, and returned to the shore upon graduation. Together with his brother David, they founded Dublin Farms in Horntown, Virginia, and built it into the center of potato growing in the Commonwealth. Phil was extremely active in the Virginia agriculture community, serving as the chairman of the Virginia State Seed Potato Board, National Potato Board, and countless other local organizations. Matching his dedication to his community was his next-level enthusiasm for the Virginia Tech Hokies, owning a maroon pickup, an orange boat, and a van dedicated to tailgating. If it was a Saturday during football season, you could count on Phil to be cheering on Tech. Phil was a devoted family man, raising the next generation of great Virginia farmers at Dublin Farms. He leaves behind a wife, son, daughter-in-law, 2 grandchildren, and his brother. Phil Hickman embodied the culture and values of the Eastern Shore, leaving behind an unforgettable legacy. The Commonwealth mourns his loss. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to celebrate the beginning of Black History Month. This month we celebrate the tremendous contributions of African Americans to the growth of our nation. Black History Month started as Negro History Week in February of 1926. That week was chosen because it included the birthdays of President Abraham Lincoln and famed abolitionist Frederick Douglass. In 1976, they expanded it to create Black History Month. Today, African Americans make a difference in every aspect of American life. Black History Month is a time to remember that. And this week was chosen, and I got that, and to highlight the fact that the African American story is one that is rich and woven into the history of our great nation. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, President Biden's economic policies continue to wreak havoc on families across our country, including the Tennessee families that I represent. Prices have skyrocketed by 17.2% since the president was sworn into office. The experts tell us these rising prices are a direct result of the deficit spending of the last 3 years, coupled with rising energy costs. And yet this administration continues to borrow and stifle American energy growth with multitudes of new and costly regulations. When President Biden took office, gas prices to average less than $2 per gallon in Tennessee. Right now, they're more than $3. This is a direct result of the president's ongoing war against American energy production. House Republicans remain committed to getting our fiscal house back in order by cutting deficit spending and passing legislation that robustly grows our economy to help get us out of the red. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to commemorate 25 years of fairness in my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky. When I was a kid, it wasn't uncommon for someone to be fired just for being gay, or kicked out of their home, or denied service in a store or restaurant. We don't know how common it was because there was no official body to report it, because it was completely legal. It's painful to think about. Fortunately, 25 years ago this week, a citizen-led effort in Louisville resulted in Kentucky's first fairness ordinance, one of the first in the nation, banning discrimination against our LGBTQ+ neighbors. Thank you to everyone who courageously fought for this life-changing achievement way back in 1999. Today, 24 Kentucky communities and 31 states have these protections. It's time for the rest of our Commonwealth and our country to follow Louisville's lead. For my entire adult life, fairness has been a reality in Louisville, and we are all better for it. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the Department of Labor has announced a new independent contractor rule, which will cost millions of American jobs and be absolutely devastating for our workforce and our economy. We know that because we've seen the effects of the law it was modeled on, AB 5, in California. As a warning against the Biden administration's new rule, I am sharing the stories of Californians who have suffered under that law. For example, Esther said, "I help people who don't speak English communicate with medical providers. I'm a proud senior, independent, and self-sufficient. AB 5 leaves me out of work, unprotected, and isolated. It takes away my pride. It was passed without taking people like me into account." To spare millions of Americans the same fate as Esther, I am calling on my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to join me in a Congressional Review Act legislation to nullify the Biden administration's new independent contractor rule. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from New Mexico seek recognition?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Good morning.
I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We just voted here in the House to bring back the child tax credit, one of the most important and effective efforts to help working families and to lift children out of poverty in generations. These payments will provide a crucial lifeline to families struggling to make ends meet. The previous child tax credit helped almost 75,000 families across my district alone. Here are some of the stories that we heard. One said, "It was the only thing keeping my family afloat while my partner was able to pursue his dream of starting a business." Another said, "As working parents, we struggled between childcare costs and paying a mortgage. The child tax credit was the only thing keeping us afloat." And yet another said, "It was the thing that helped pay down my student loans." These are just a few of the many stories of how the child tax credit gave New Mexico families a lifeline. And here we are this week fighting to get it passed. I will not stop until we make the permanent child tax credit a reality and get it across the finish line. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to address the House floor for 1 minute to extend and revise my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the tax and regulatory burdens on our businesses are crippling, and it is incumbent upon us to change that. Last night, Congress took a step in the right direction to do something positive to help businesses and this struggling economy. We came together to pass the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act. This bill will spur American innovation and competitiveness, will reinvigorate manufacturing jobs at home, and will restore Trump-era business-friendly tax policies that spur economic growth. My East Texas businesses have been asking for a pro-growth, pro-job, and pro-American tax package designed to revitalize our economy and provide relief to American small businesses, and last night we provided such a package. Restoring smart tax policy matters. This bill extends the 2017 Republican Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that has a proven track record of incentivizing U.S. investment, lifting families out of poverty, and allowing Americans to keep more of their paychecks. I stand with our small businesses, and I thank Chairman Smith for his diligent work on this thoughtful tax policy. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to celebrate the life and legacy of Joseph Amp Fidler as we mourn his passing. Amp Fidler was born in Detroit, where he grew up surrounded by the sounds of Motown, rock, jazz, funk, and electronic music. His big break came when he joined the legendary George Clinton's Parliament Funkadelic. It was during this time that Amp honed in his skills on the keyboard and contributing significantly to the band's distinctive sound. Fidler collaborated with many notable artists like Prince, and is credited with helping launch the pioneer and hip-hop sounds of our own Detroit's legendary Jay Dilla. He enjoyed a long, successful solo career marked by his distinctive blend of funk and contemporary sounds. Fidler always remained humble and dedicated to his craft and our community. Please join me in recognizing Amp Fidler, a true guiding force for Detroit's musical culture as we mourn his loss.
What purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize February as Career and Technical Education Month. In recognizing this month, we are highlighting the value of career and technical education has not just for our students, but for our country. As the co-chair of the Bipartisan Career and Technical Education Caucus, I'm proud to be an advocate for CTE and the work that we do to support job training, apprenticeships, and CTE programs. Skills-based education provides learners of all ages with career-ready skills, giving individuals the tools to succeed and restore the rungs on the ladder of opportunity. A highly skilled workforce is important to the success of our American workforce. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to have be co-chair of the Bipartisan CTE Caucus and to work with Congresswoman Bonamici as we work together in introducing a resolution to recognize the importance of career and technical education. In Congress, I will continue to work feverishly to close our nation's skills gap and provide our next generation of workers with the tools needed to succeed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House and revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
After a long fight, and as a senior member of the Budget Committee, we have gotten to a point where we can say to the American people, we care about you and we care about your families and most of all, your children. The first step yesterday of taking a leap to be able to establish for this nation a permanent child tax cut relief is unbelievable in terms of the lives of America's children. Please be reminded that this is for our children. I cannot remember or cannot forget the emotions that I felt when I opened up the registration for the child tax relief during the pandemic and the Biden administration gave that opportunity, and see the mothers coming in with 2 and 3 children, one in a stroller, seeking to be able to get the relief that was needed. This permanent tax relief must be passed. And again, I will continue this fight into the Senate to ensure that in the middle of filing season, this legislation could deepen relief for 16 million children and lift as many as 400,000 children above the line of poverty in the first year alone. Increase the maximum refundability of the credit. Give eligible families the option to use their earned income from prior year. That is crucial to be able to ensure that the child tax credit lifts our children up and helps our family. Let's get it done. A permanent child tax credit.
The gentleman's time has
relief.
expired.
I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize and thank Tim Monahan for his 15 years of service to the House of Representatives. A native of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Tim began his service to the House by working with the Chief Administrative Officer. He later joined the staff of the House Appropriations Committee, where he worked on the Legislative Branch Subcommittee. Tim then joined the House Administration Committee, where he rose through the ranks, first as Director of Oversight, then Deputy Staff Director, and finally Staff Director. At the beginning of this Congress, Speaker Kevin McCarthy elevated Tim to the Director of House Operations in the Office of the Speaker. He remained in this position to assist with the transition to Speaker Mike Johnson. In every position, Tim brought an unmatched level of understanding and creativity. He has implemented enterprise reforms that have helped make this a better place to conduct the people's business and improve the lives of everyone who works here. Tim has become a trusted advisor and friend to everyone, from those serving at the heights of power to the men and women with the often thankless job of keeping this place operating. While Tim's service to the House is coming to an end for now, I know each of us will continue to experience the benefit of that service for years to come. Thank you, Tim, and good luck in all that is to come. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, last week I joined thousands of people, Kama'aina and Malahini alike, in walking from Mauka to Makai in Lahaina in celebration of unity and healing. We lost so much in the fires, loved ones, homes, businesses. The Lele Aloha Ho'ulu Lahaina Unity March reminded us that despite all we lost, we still have each other. Under a sea of flags representing the countries of both victims and survivors, we walked for everything we lost. With each step we took, we came closer together with shared hopes for Lahaina's future. That day, we walked 4.5 miles, but the road to recovery stretches much longer, and we will keep walking together no matter how long it takes. As pule were spoken and ho'okupu offered by visiting canoes, we stood and walked side by side, equals in the pride we feel and hope we have for Lahaina. Next week marks the 6-month anniversary of the Maui fires, and while it will be a solemn occasion, the miles that we have walked together remind us that though we have been tested, aloha will always win. Thank you, and I yield back.
What purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the Georgia National Guard's Cherokee Company soldiers. Over the weekend, I was honored to attend a send-off ceremony in Gainesville, Georgia for Cherokee Company troops ahead of their deployment to Kuwait. The following day, our nation learned the tragic news that 3 U.S. soldiers were killed at Tower 22 in Jordan by a drone attack carried out by the Iranian-backed terrorists.
During these times of global instability, we must honor, support, and thank our brave service members who answer the call of duty to defend our country, preserve our peace, and protect our precious freedoms. I firmly believe that one of the best ways we can support both our troops deploying overseas and their families is through the power of prayer. So I urge Georgia's 9th District and all others in our state to join me in praying for strength, wisdom, and protection for our soldiers, as well as for peace and comfort for their loved ones. Father, may your mighty right hand protect our Cherokee Company troops, as well as all of our nation's warriors who serve so that we can live in freedom in the greatest country on earth. May Psalm 91 be their banner. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to talk about what's at stake right now, who's here to lead and who we got to watch out for. Last year, there was a small number of more extreme members that took this country to the brink of default. But a bipartisan majority of us voted to stop that and to protect our economy. When the Speaker brought us a bill, a bipartisan bill to fix air travel, that same bipartisan majority of us voted to pass that too. Is that bipartisan majority gone? Nope. We are still here. In fact, last night, the Speaker brought to the floor a bipartisan bill to provide meaningful tax relief for families and small businesses, and we passed it overwhelmingly. So bring us a bipartisan budget to protect millions of jobs and critical investments in our families. We'll pass that too. Bring us this bipartisan bill agreement to fix the border. We will pass that. The largest majority in this House is our bipartisan majority. So bring us these bills. We'll pass each and every one of them, and that's what the American people want and need us to do. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I seek unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the Biden economy has taken its toll on main streets in Northeast Florida and all across America, from stores struggling to jobs lost to limited research and development to chaotic inflation. We're in need of tax relief. There is a bill that gives immediate tax relief for families, farmers, and small businesses, that launches our economy forward and finally ends the COVID giveaways. It's pro-jobs, pro-taxpayer, pro-America. Mr. Speaker, with the exception of Joe Biden, I don't believe there's another American who genuinely believes our nation is headed in the right direction. I've got good news, America. The House has passed the Tax Relief for American Families and Workers Act. Help is on the way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
And revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to remember a dedicated public servant and appropriations policy advisor par excellence, my former chief of staff and friend Michael Joseph Reed. Michael transitioned on Monday, January 15th. Starting as a presidential management intern at the U.S. Department of Transportation, he went on to serve two prolific congressional appropriators, Congressman Lou Stokes of Ohio and Bill Gray of Pennsylvania. When I got a seat on the House Appropriations Committee in 2003, I needed a seasoned specialist and was blessed to have Michael Reed join my team, first as special assistant, then deputy chief of staff, and finally chief of staff and senior policy advisor. For 18 years, I matriculated in the Michael Reed School of Budgetary Policy. He was a master, learning the intricacies of ag policy. He became an asset to me and was highly respected on both sides of the aisle. Upon leaving the Hill, he was honored by the communities and industries he helped, including the University of Georgia School of Agriculture and the Georgia Peanut Commission, among others. The research and disaster relief he'd made possible for American agriculture are among his lasting legacies. Family and friends will celebrate his life in a private ceremony this week. We mourn his loss, but thank God that his legacy of service will
will endure. I yield back the balance of my time.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I, too, today rise to honor the life and legacy of an exemplary public servant and friend, Mr. Michael Joseph Reed, who passed away earlier this month. He spent nearly 2 decades advising my good friend and colleague, Mr. Sanford Bishop, until his retirement from public service. Michael was a shining example of dedication and service during his tenure on Capitol Hill, serving in many capacities to pass legislation and appropriation that benefited my great state and its citizens, as well as the United States of America. My wife, Vivian, and I extend our deepest sympathies to Michael's wife, Miss Diane Fields Reed, and the entire Reed family and the staff of Representative Bishop. Mr. Speaker, before I yield, I just want to say this one last thing about Michael Reed. It didn't matter if you were a Democrat or Republican, especially a Democrat or Republican member of the staff. When you had a question about appropriations, it was Michael Reed that you called to get the straight answer. And if he could help you, he would. He's one of the most dependable people I've ever met in my life. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, I honor the St. Croix Avis, our cherished newspaper, as it has concluded a remarkable 180-year journey, leaving a legacy that is both historic and deeply rooted in our community. Established in 1844, the St. Croix Avis was a beacon of enlightenment. It laid the foundation for a literate Black population. The paper's Black-owned, Black-run symbolized not only the dissemination of information, but also the affirmation of dignity and voicing an opinion. Over the decades, the Avis has been more than a witness to history. It's been its scribe. From the era of chattel slavery to modern challenges, it has chronicled our evolution as a people and served as an invaluable source of information and engagement in our community. Let us remember the St. Croix Avis for the history it helped write and for the critical role it played in our community's growth and development. Thank you, Rena. You and your dad, Mr. Broadhurst, and the previous owners. It will forever remain a cherished chapter in the story of the Virgin Islands and an enduring symbol of our Virgin Islands' dignity and pride. I yield back.
The gentlewoman from Georgia seek recognition.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Clause 2A.1 of Rule 9, I seek recognition to give notice of my intent to raise a question of the privileges of the House. The form of the resolution is as follows.
Recognized.
Censuring Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota. Whereas elected members of Congress take an oath to bear true faith and allegiance to the United States without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. Whereas Representative Ilhan Omar took an oath of allegiance to the United States upon becoming a citizen, declaring, I absolutely and entirely renounce and abjure all allegiance and fidelity to any foreign prince, potentate, state, or sovereignty, of whom or which I have heretofore been a subject or citizen. Whereas on January 27, 2024, Representative Omar gave remarks at an event in Minneapolis in which she made treasonous statements. Whereas Representative Omar said she has spoken to many Somalians who asked her to intercede for the Somali government by pressuring the United States government into certain actions. Whereas Representative Omar assured the Somalians she spoke to, the U.S. government will only do what Somalians in the U.S. tell them to do. They will do what we want and nothing else. They must follow our orders, and that is how we will safeguard the interest of Somalia. Whereas Representative Omar continued, for as long as I am in U.S. Congress, Somalia will never be in danger. Its waters will not be stolen by Ethiopia or others. Sleep in comfort knowing I am here to protect the interest of Somalia from inside the U.S. system. Whereas George Washington warned in his farewell address of 1796 to guard against the impostures of pretended patriotism, and further declared citizens by birth or choice of a common country, that country has a right to concentrate your affections. The name of American, which belongs to you in your national capacity, must always exalt the just pride of patriotism more than any appellation derived from local discriminations. Whereas these statements by Representative Omar clearly violate the oath she took as an elected member of Congress to defend and protect the United States Constitution. Whereas Representative Omar has exhibited the treasonous tendencies George Washington warned about, and her actions must be condemned by all members of Congress who adhere to the oath they took upon assuming office. And whereas by openly admitting her efforts to advance Somalia's interest using her position as a United States representative, Representative Omar has revealed herself to be a foreign agent acting on behalf of a foreign government. Now, therefore, be it resolved that Representative Ilhan Omar of Minnesota be censured. Representative Ilhan Omar forthwith present herself in the well of the House of Representatives for the pronouncement of censure. Representative Ilhan Omar be censured with the public reading of this resolution by the Speaker, and Representative Ilhan Omar be and is hereby removed from the Committee of the Budget and the Committee on Education and the Workforce.
Under Rule 9, a resolution offered from the floor by a member other than the majority leader or the minority leader as a question of the privileges of the House has immediate precedence only at a time designated by the chair within 2 legislative days after the resolution is properly noticed. Pending that designation, the form of the resolution, noticed by the gentlewoman from Georgia, will appear in the record at this point. The chair will not at this point determine whether the resolution constitutes a question of privilege. That determination will be made at the time designated for consideration of the resolution. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the minority leader.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to say that I was saddened to have to oppose the tax bill that the House of Representatives passed last evening. I could not, in good conscience, vote for a deal that so lopsidedly benefits big corporations while failing to ensure a substantial tax cut to middle and working class families. I believe this deal is deeply inequitable, and at a time when we have seen the greatest rise in inequality, when big corporations made super profits at the expense of the consumer, it is a mockery of who representative government works for. This bill delivers massive tax cuts for the biggest corporations while denying middle-class families the economic security they had under the expanded monthly child tax credit that was passed in 2021. Let me be unequivocal. This is a reversal of the largest middle-class tax cut in the history of the United States. This bill provides billions of dollars in tax relief for the wealthy and pennies for the poor. This expanded and improved child tax credit, which we passed in 2021, it returns $8 for every dollar spent. How? Because the child tax credit helps children learn more, earn more, and grow up healthier. Which is why I find it upsetting and appalling that we would condition a limited extension of this life-altering program with a vast giveaway to billionaires and corporations who are already well-practiced in paying no taxes. Dish Network, FedEx, Salesforce, T-Mobile, and dozens of others. And I'll later give you the list of the others. These corporations, dozens of others, pay no federal income tax from 2018 to 2020 under the Trump tax law. At a time when big corporations are richer than ever, the idea that we must evenly split the pot with working and middle-class families is absurd. But there is no even split in this bill. It's $5 for the corporations and $1 to our children. Understand, people are calling this an expansion of the child tax credit. It is no expansion of the child tax credit. It is a step backward, and that needs to be understood. When groceries and other costs like the child care have skyrocketed, driving record corporate profits of $3 trillion in 2023, it was families bearing the brunt of inflation and high interest rates. The expanded monthly child tax credit is an antidote to child poverty. It is an antidote to inflation. It is a successful tool that lifted millions and millions of children out of poverty virtually overnight. Half of children in the United States were lifted out of poverty. 4 million. Today, families live paycheck to paycheck. Their wages have not kept up with rising costs. The economy is not working for them. And to our great shame, it is children who will suffer the most. This bill fails to sufficiently improve the child tax credit. It leaves millions of middle-class families without a tax cut like they received in 2021. It keeps millions of children in preventable poverty because of a policy choice. This bill strips working-class families of the true economic security that was achieved with the expanded monthly child tax credit under the American Rescue Plan. I understand that no bill that can become law, especially in a divided government like we have today, is going to be perfect or have everything that we want. I'm grateful for the hard work of Representatives Neal and Pelosi, Senators Bennett, Brown, Booker, and Wyden on the bill, and for the members who spoke out, who offered amendments to improve it. Representatives Del Bene, Sanchez, Moore, Congresswoman Moore is here today and will speak in short order, Representative Sewell and Representative Doggett. An extension of the expanded monthly child tax credit is what our constituents need and deserve. It worked better than any other federal program that we have seen. As I said, it lifted half of our children out of poverty, lowered the hunger rate in the United States by 26%. We lowered the child poverty rate, and today the rate has gone from 5.2% to 12.4%. And yes, working families, middle-class families, vulnerable families have seen their wages decline as a result of pulling the rug out from under them with the expiration of the child tax credit. It is the one best thing we can do to improve economic well-being and security of the most vulnerable American families and to bring back the largest middle-class tax cut in history. This was a lost opportunity. A lost opportunity. It leads the way to, in 2025, making the Trump tax credits, which benefited the richest 0.1% of the people in this country, the biggest corporations in this country. It leads the way to moving in that direction. It can't go there. We have to stop that, and we have to make sure that we will. I will look forward to continue that fight, to have an expanded and an improved child tax credit that we delivered for all families in 2021. And with that, what I want to do is to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Virginia, my colleague, Representative Scott, who is and will become the chair of the Education and Labor Committee come 2025. Congressman Scott is recognized. 4 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentlelady for yielding. I want to thank her for her long-time commitment to the child tax credit. We know it works, and she's been the most dedicated advocate for the child tax credit that we have in the United States Congress today. Thank you, Rosa DeLauro. When congressional Democrats and President Biden enacted the American Rescue Plan in 2021 without a single Republican vote, we prioritized the economic well-being of working families with the expanded monthly child tax credit. The expanded child tax credit under the American Rescue Plan reached 61 million children and reduced child poverty by nearly half, lifting nearly 3 or 4 million children out of poverty. In contrast, this bill is expected to lift only 500,000 children out of poverty when it is fully phased in. So this is not an extension of the child tax credit that we passed in the American Rescue Plan. It is not as generous. It does not help the lowest income families, and unlike the ARP plan, there are no monthly checks. People do not pay their bills once a year. They pay them monthly. So the impact of this program will not nearly be as strong as the former child tax credit that we passed in the American Rescue Plan. And so this deal fails to reinstate the economic gains made for working families and fails to come anywhere close to the reduction in child poverty achieved under the American Rescue Plan. And while providing only $33 billion in benefits for children, this bill prioritizes $185 billion in tax cuts for corporations that were included in the 2017 Trump tax scam. It is overwhelmingly lopsided in favor of big corporations that are already paying historically low tax rates as a result of the Trump tax scam. And what's even more egregious is the bill makes the tax breaks for corporations and businesses retroactive and immediate, while not doing the same for working families. This doesn't make sense from either a budgetary or a public policy perspective, and is a bold display of misplaced priorities. It is notable that congressional Republicans sanctimoniously complain about the national debt and budget deficits. Earlier this month, Republicans on the House Budget Committee even passed the so-called Fiscal Commission Act because they were seemingly so concerned about the national debt and claimed to want to do something about it. And yet, they consistently abandon all sense of fiscal responsibility when it comes to enacting corporate tax cuts. In fact, before the bill has even come to the floor, we just passed the tax cut last night costing about $200 billion. That, when fully phased in over 10 years, will cost about $700 billion over the 10-year period. And so, Mr. Speaker, ultimately I voted no because this fiscally irresponsible tax deal is too lopsided in favor of corporations and special interests while failing to provide equivalent support for working families. Again, I thank Rosa DeLauro for her advocacy for the child tax credit and for families, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank you, and I thank the gentleman from Virginia, and someone who has been an indefatigable champion for education and for working people in this country, and always at the forefront of what makes sense in terms of providing for the economic security of people in this country, and particularly in children, in his work. And he just hit the nail on the head that this is a question of just such gross inequity that is going to be foisted on our families and our children. And the people who are standing up and talking about the expansion are just fooling themselves about what this bill is about. They need to take a look at who the beneficiaries are. And I just say a thank you to Congressman Scott for his work now and what he's done in the past and what he will continue to do in the future in this body. Thank you so much for being here. And with that, let me yield to the gentlelady from Wisconsin, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, who sits on the Ways and Means Committee, and in that committee stood, and she'll talk about her amendment, which was defeated on a party line vote, but someone who's never afraid to stand up and to speak out, and she did so last night on this floor in opposition to this lopsided tax deal. Congresswoman Moore was recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much for putting together this special order, Representative DeLauro. Mr. Speaker, I felt really compelled to come to the floor because 1 minute last night during the tax debate did not seem to be adequate to explain why I adamantly opposed the tax bill in its current iteration. Mr. Speaker, Ms. DeLauro, what I have been told is that a half loaf is just better than no loaf at all. That this tax bill was a compromise, and that somehow, as a legislative body and as a legislator, we ought to be used to compromising. But I just didn't want to capitulate. I didn't mind compromising, but I didn't want to capitulate. And it wasn't just that we passed this tax bill that supposedly was an improvement for the child tax credit, but we passed $600 billion of tax breaks for businesses, which is the job of the Ways and Means Committee. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what members of this body have against poor children. And why, are we in some sort of Dickensian reality here? Charles Dickens, where 5-year-olds have to go to work to take care of themselves? So part of what is flawed about this so-called improvement in the child tax credit is that it relegates children's well-being and their ability to get a supplemental income based on their parents' income. So, if you're married and you're a stay-home mom and you make, your husband makes $399,000 a year, I'm happy that we provide you the full credit. Because even at that income level, we ought to recognize the tremendous expense that it is to raise children, and we ought to consider the benefits of providing shelter and good food and good nutrition for children. But why is it that those children in that home are more deserving of a supplement than a child who lives in a household where a parent makes less than $22,000 a year? Why? Why is it that this body perceives that the lowest income children living in those households, that their parents need to put in a greater work effort? Well, I asked the Joint Committee on Taxation to do a little arithmetic for me so that I could sort of understand the thinking behind what my colleagues were saying. They said people need to work. Children need to see their parents going to work before they just get this welfare money and this free money. Well, under current law, if single mom gets out there and gets herself a minimum wage job, doing her part, she's only required under our welfare policy to work 20 hours a week. But if she gets out there and finds herself 2 minimum wage jobs, paying $7.25 an hour, and she goes and does Uber or Instacart after she finishes her 2 part-time jobs. Then and only then will she be eligible for the tax credit. And I don't know who takes care of her kids while she's working more than 40 hours per week in order to qualify for the child tax credit. I mean, that's just criminal. And as my colleagues have pointed out, in this same tax package, we have corporations that are getting stuff like research expensing, you know, and I think R&D is a legitimate tax break. But some of it, there's research expensing that can hardly be called research. You know, we also provide billions of dollars for bonus depreciation, which is really quite wasteful in our economy for companies to be able to buy new equipment year after year after year, because they can expense it, write it off. And while they're able to write off their business expenses, we're writing off millions of children whose parents don't have tax liability. So companies can have no tax liability, pay no taxes, and get $600 billion, and parents who have no tax liability get nothing. Now, I'm going to yield back to you in a moment, Ms. DeLauro, but I would like you to yield to a question before I do. As a refundable tax credit, there are about 61 million children who are able to benefit from this provision. And yet, I see through all of the talking points and literature and analyses of this proposal, that we're just supposed to be happy with this half loaf because now 16 million kids and 400,000 more are going to benefit from this proposal. Is this correct?
Let me just mention, and first of all, let me say thank you. And the point that you have made and that Congressman Scott made, these tax breaks for the richest corporations, they're immediate. They are immediate. The child tax credit, this has to be phased in over a 3-year period of time. And it is a lower number than they had with the original expanded monthly child tax credit, which was $3,000 for kids between 6 and 17, $3,600 for kids who are under 6. So it is a lower credit. And then they phase it in terms of refundability. And the most vulnerable kids are excluded altogether. And it is astounding that the inequity of all of that. Now, what we did with the child tax credit, which was in the American Rescue Plan, the monthly credit reached 61 million children.
61 million.
61 million children. And and there was about 4 million kids lifted out of poverty, almost half the kids in the U.S. lifted out of poverty. Now, what we're talking about in this tax deal is 400,000 kids. They talk about being lifted out of poverty versus 4 million. And the 16 million that's made reference to is some piece of it at some portion in some time during this phase-in, et cetera, will be the beneficiary of a much lower tax credit. And in addition to that, what people are saying is that we've expanded the child tax credit. Folks out there are going to believe that they're going to be getting what they got in 2021. And it's misinformation. It is just about trying to put a veneer on what's been done here in giving the biggest corporations, and as Congressman Scott pointed out, in this three-year period, $185 billion versus $33 billion for the child tax credit. You know, don't tell me, give me the facts. And that's what we try to do. Mm-hmm. That's what we have tried to do in the last week since this proposal came out, is give people the information, the accurate information about what is here. And they're hiding it, and they're hiding it. And you know what? As I said, unbelievable missed opportunity. You know, I was told, I have to say this, I was told when we first went forward on the child tax credit, I wanted it to be permanent. They said, we can't do it, we can't afford permanence. I said, 5 years. Can't do it, can't afford it. 5 years. 3 years, can't afford it. 1 year. And then they asked me, would you support 1 year of expanded monthly child tax credit? And I said yes. And as I mentioned earlier, the most successful federal program that we have seen coming down the pike that met its mission in lifting kids out of poverty and providing families with economic security, helping them to deal with the cost of living effort. I was also told at that time, Rosa, we do it for a year, it's not going to go away. Yeah. It's not going to go away. It went away. And the first opportunity that we had to restore the child tax credit, we failed.
We pushed more
fail.
Kids into poverty.
That's right. The kids have gone back into poverty. And it's preventable, as you pointed out. This is preventable poverty. We know the answer, and we have refused to take that answer and move forward on it. That's what happened here last night.
Can I ask you another question? Will the gentlelady continue to yield? As you mentioned, I had a proposal, a compromise.
Your amendment, go for it.
A compromise, not what I wanted. I wanted a fully refundable tax credit. But I was looking at our current work requirements for this tax credit. And I said to myself, even though a work requirement really defies the whole purpose of a child supplement, if we were to compromise and have a work requirement, why would someone who, through no fault of their own, finds themselves working for $7.25 an hour, you know, they're subject to rules under our welfare reform protocols, under our TANF legislation, to work 20 hours a week when they have young children. And I had the Joint Committee on Taxation do an analysis, and if a woman with 2 kids worked 20 hours a week, did everything that was expected of her, she still would not qualify for this tax credit. And if she wanted to get a fully refundable tax credit, she'd have to neglect her children in order to do it. She'd have to work more than 40 hours, Mr. Scott, in order to qualify. You know, that's slavery, y'all. I mean, are we going to revisit? Why are we continuing to cling to these old models of financing our economy and deciding that women who, by definition, you know, are typically single parents struggling to raise their kids, must work more than 40 hours in order to receive a benefit from their government? Why is that? Why? What do they have against these poor children? And I would ask you to yield to that question.
Well, you ask a very relevant question, and we have seen Congressman Kassar, Congressman Scott, yourself, we've seen on this floor the denigration of working families in this country. It is that they don't work, that the first people who, when we talked about the child tax credit, they said, well, they're not going to go to work, that they're going to spend the money on drugs,
Right.
And when we got the data of what happened in that 1 year, we found that women used the money for childcare so that they could go to work. That the money was used to buy food, to pay a rent, to buy school supplies, to pay for health care, for a mortgage payment.
For child care.
Child care was one of the biggest issues because then it allowed people to go to work.
And it incentivized them to work.
That's right. It's because they want to denigrate working folks. And they just say these corporations and the folks at Tenet and the richest 1/10 of 1% who cut coupons, that's the work. They exercise their fingers with a scissor and cut coupons, or the corporations who deal with stock buybacks. That's okay. They're not held accountable. But by God, we are going to put it to people who are trying to make ends meet, trying to deal with the cost of living and inflation today, and that child tax credit helped them do that, and we pulled the rug out from under them.
And so, Mr. Laurel, my only proposal was I thought to have a more generous phase in. If you're going to require people to work, why not allow them to have 40% of the credit after the first $2,500 of income? That way, someone who was working and trying to meet all of the program requirements of a TANF recipient could go to work and feel some dignity, as they claim that you get, some dignity, going to work, making work pay. They go and do their 20 hours, and they're able to have time to deal with their children and help them with their homework, and they get the earned income tax credit. Playing by the rules. And all we do is just move the goalposts further and further away. Under this bill, you cannot work your way out of poverty. And we're going to make sure you stay there.
I thank the gentlelady. You just, you hit all of the efforts in this. Look, and you just said it. Children and families with $0 to $2,500 in earnings get nothing. And corporations who have avoided any kind of a tax liability get everything that they asked for. And the business community and the corporations put the red lines down, and when we had our red lines, they got blurred and we walked backward, and we gave them everything they wanted, and we made it retroactive and say, go for it, take it, laying the groundwork for next year. And we said, we're going to skimp on this child tax credit and make sure that it doesn't reach all of those who need to be reached in order for us to turn poverty around in this country, which we proved that we could do. And with that, I'm so delighted to be able to recognize Congressman from Texas, Greg Casar, who is recognized for 4 minutes, who stood up yesterday on this floor and voted no on this tax deal last night. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for your progressive nature on this stuff and for all of the issues that face working and middle-class families in this country and make this a more equitable society. I yield the gentleman 4 minutes.
Thank you, Ranking Member. Mr. Speaker, I opposed the tax bill last night, and to me it was pretty simple, because whether I'm in Austin, Texas, or San Antonio, Texas, whether I'm in a group of seniors or with young people in front of more liberal constituents or conservative ones, one of the most common questions I get asked is, why is it that I and everyday Americans pay such a higher effective tax rate than some of the biggest corporations in this country? How is it that FedEx and T-Mobile would pay none, zero, in federal income tax at all? And the answer is, look no further than the bill that we voted to pass last night, which provided tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions, in giveaways and corporate tax breaks. Importantly, as folks have noted, packaged into the bill is a watered-down partial return of the child tax credit, which thankfully will help thousands of families. But for every dollar going to kids in the bill, $5 goes to corporations. So in short, instead of helping thousands of kids, we could have helped millions of kids. We have the money to pull kids out of poverty, to ensure that people in this country are housed and fed and educated. The money is there. In this case, the money was sitting right there in this bill, just in the wrong people's pockets. We have to be willing to move the money from corporate pockets over to kids and families. We could provide working class and middle class tax cuts. We just have to be willing to fight and negotiate harder to end the giveaways to billionaires. And ranking member, just like you, I'm open to compromise. But instead of a deal where corporations get $5 for every $1 that kids get, what about a compromise where kids get $5 for every dollar that corporations get? I oppose this bill because we can do so much better. It is such a missed opportunity. We have to be willing to say no to deals that are so lopsided that workers get crumbs while corporate executives get a full steak dinner. Thank you, and I yield back.
You've made said very, very good points. A missed opportunity. That's the regret in all of this. Again, when I was told that you get it for a year, it's not going to go away. Well, not only did it go away, but it came back as a much watered down proposal. And what is equally troubling is the number of people who are out there saying that this is an expansion. It really is doublespeak to the American people. It isn't an expansion. It is moving backward. It's and the notion that half a loaf is better than none, something is better than nothing. We cannot afford that kind of a philosophy in going forward. That's not our job. Our job is to advocate for the American people, for those working families, those middle-class families, those vulnerable families, for children. That's what we should do here. And we have that obligation. When corporate profits have skyrocketed, $3 trillion in 2023, how do we, in good conscience, say, amen, you get millions and millions of dollars in a tax break. Your goal is to get to $600 billion. And we cannot draw that line in the sand and say no. I believe in research and development. We all do. But the inequity that is built into this tax package is stunning. And, to use the words of my colleague from Wisconsin, a capitulation of saying, amen, it's okay. And that we'll fight another day. No, we had a moment to fight. And we missed that moment. But we are not stopping. We are not stopping. I heard a lot of people last night say, well, we'll get to next year and we'll get the child tax credit to where it was. And it was not just a mental note. I made a list of the folks who talked about getting us to where we need to be. And time flies. We are going to hold people to their words here. Or that it's not ever going to be permanent. Well, we're going to hold you to that as well. If we're going to make anything permanent, it has to be the child tax credit. It is the antidote to inflation. It allowed families to be able to achieve economic security that they had not seen in generations because their wages haven't gone up in generations. That's what's on the minds of people today, how they are going to economically survive. And we had that opportunity to give them that help. I don't put aside helping 400,000 kids, but we could have helped many millions of kids in what we call preventable poverty. If we don't understand what our values are, who we are, why we are privileged to serve in this institution, and we can look at public policy in a way that makes a difference for people. The great Joseph Stiglitz, who is a Nobel laureate in economics, who said, inequality is not because of globalization or modernization, but it is the public policy choices that we make. And last night, this body made a public policy choice to continue the inequality and inequitable advantage that corporations have over their lives, their families' lives, their kids' lives. That's not the direction we're going in. We will continue the fight that we have started here. This now goes to the United States Senate, and let's just see how we can influence the process there. And we will continue until there is a permanent child tax credit. And what is important that comes out of this debate in the last several days is that we have raised the decibel level on a child tax credit, its success, and its future as permanent for this country. And we're going to keep it on that front burner, and we're not going to let it go. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time. I want to say a thank you to Congressman Scott, Congresswoman Gwen Moore, and Congressman Kassar for being here this afternoon. Thank you.
Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 9th, 2023, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Wow, we're not going to go that long, but we're going to start off by leading with
If the gentleman would suspend,
Yes.
the chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker.
The chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, I have a message from the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I am directed by the President of the United States to deliver to the House of Representatives a message in writing.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized. The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized.
I'd like to yield, say, 3 minutes to Congressman Loudermilk.
4.
Well, thank you to my good friend, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honor the service of someone who I believe is one of the best staff members in this institution, Mr. Tim Monahan. I first met Tim a few years ago during his tenure with the Committee on House Administration. And as with me, Tim has left a lasting impression on many here in Congress. Anyone who has ever met Tim probably remembers their first impression of the Gettysburg neighbor who some refer to as a grizzly with a Philly charm. As you get to know Tim, you learn just how steadfast, generous, and kind he really is. He's the kind of person who can handle anything that's thrown his way, whether it be big feelings, awkward moments, and even the most outlandish member requests. Tim first started on the Hill at the office of the CAO during Speaker Boehner's years, where he learned the nuts and bolts of our institution. Later, serving on the Legislative Branch Appropriations Committee, Tim deepened his institutional relationship while ensuring his work was for the greater benefit of the House. He joined Ranking Member Rodney Davis at the Committee on House Administration at the beginning of the 116th Congress, where his natural leadership skills quickly stood out, and he was soon appointed staff director for the committee. In 2023, Tim took over the House operations for Speaker Kevin McCarthy, where he remained a steady hand during several unprecedented moments, including staying on through the transitions of Speaker Pro Tem McHenry and now Speaker Mike Johnson. So much could be said about Tim's dedication to our institution and the people working here. I could talk about his vital role reopening the House post-pandemic, his conflict resolution skills, his role in the first House filibuster, his helping Congressman Davis carry Representative Wright to safety on January 6, 2021, staffing a historic 15 rounds of votes for the Speaker of the House, his mentorship and leadership for the past 15 years, or his deep, resolute patriotism. Tim possesses an honor and respect for the halls of Congress that is admired by many. He gets to know and cares about all of those who work within its walls and works hard to ensure that our Capitol remains a functional beacon of our constitutional republic. Tim's legacy in the House will be his strong character and his servant leadership. Everyone who knows Tim is better for it. And now, as he prepares to leave the House, our institution is better thanks to his service. Tim, we wish you all the best in this next chapter of your life. Hopefully, your departure from the House will allow more time with you, with your lovely wife, Marissa, your baby daughter, Marion, and your puppy, Bella. Some of the staffers you've worked with have had some parting wishes for you. We hope the soup is plentiful in the next cafeteria, the nuts are absent, and that you have more time to listen to J-Lo and dream of Tiger Woods' comebacks. And please, they said, if you ever try the grocery store sushi, Pringles, and kombucha combo again, please don't share. But to me, Tim has been not only a great member of the House staff, but he has been a close, confident, and a good friend. He's been instrumental in helping me with some of the greatest moments in my tenure as a member of Congress, but he has also helped me through some of the most difficult times. Tim Monahan is the gold standard of this institution, and more should aspire to be like him. Tim, we will miss you. God bless you. And I yield back.
Thank you very much. I'm going to comment on a variety of things. Like always, I like to use this time to bring the chair's attention to stories that I don't feel our mainstream media is doing an adequate job of covering. A couple comments before I delve into these 5 stories. First of all, Congressman Loudermilk gave a shout out to one of his staffers who's leaving. This will be the final week that Kyle Amato of my office will be working for me, and I'd like to thank him publicly for the great job he does, particularly putting out the newsletters that everyone around the 6th Congressional District in Wisconsin like. The second thing I'd like to do is I really didn't care for the form of the child tax credit that's been discussed so much today, but I would like to thank the people for putting it together for this one reason. Normally around here, when we pass legislation designed to benefit the children, we leave out the children of what I'll call the working middle class. In other words, if you are hardly working at all, certainly if there's not a man in the house, this institution gives more and more benefits to people that demographic. But we did something the other day which is almost unheard of. We extended those benefits to the middle class. So while there are certainly problems with the way it's laid out, if you're a married couple making $120,000 a year and have a couple kids, you're going to get the child credits just as you would if you weren't working at all. So small favors, but I'd like to point that out. Now, the first issue that I don't think has been adequately addressed around here is there has been, I think, misinformation spread on the conflict between Israel and Hamas or Israel and Gaza. And we're supposed to be very sensitive and say Hamas is one group and Gaza is another group. But in fact, Hamas, at least the polls show, is wildly popular in the West Bank and also, of course, popular in Gaza. And in Gaza, they elected Hamas. I think too many people feel it's a historical conflict, and in a way, we heard this from a speech from a prominent American earlier today, they're kind of treated as two sides of the same coin. In fact, that is not true. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about the people in Gaza should be so lucky, so grateful, realize how lucky and grateful they are that they are living so close to Israel. There are far too many Americans in general, and congressmen in particular, who define this conflict as between two sides apparently equal or close to equal. In fact, Gaza has been treated incredibly fairly and generously by Israel. When Gaza was set up as kind of an independent, I don't know what you'd call it, principality a while ago, the Israelis removed the Jewish temples from the area, despite the fact that in Israel proper, there are 400 Muslim mosques, but in Gaza, Israel felt, well, okay, if they don't want them, they shouldn't have to put up with temples in that area. Not only that, they physically removed Israelis who were living in Gaza. Maybe you remember this. Physically grabbed and removed them from Gaza to the rest of Israel. So apparently the Gazans did not have to put up with Jews living in Gaza. I mean, that was bending over backwards. It was almost barbaric. Then Gazans were able to work in Israel. Israel's a wildly successful Western country on the Mediterranean. And as the result, I think the second biggest source of revenue for people in Gaza was working in businesses in Israel. That is their major source of income, along with foreign welfare that they didn't work for at all, that largely comes from Europe. When Gaza was set up as an independent or somewhat independent principality, they were given greenhouses so they could take over those businesses and make money. Of course, the Palestinians on their own destroyed the greenhouses because they didn't want to accept something that was tainted by previously being Jewish businesses, which is kind of offensive, and I don't think the public knows that enough. Even before the savage attacks in October, and I think one way you can tell whether you are put upon and have things tough or whether you have things easy is other people want to be like you or are people running away from you. Already at the time of the barbaric acts in October, there were thousands, over 10,000 people from Thailand living in Israel, working in Israel. In other words, they came halfway around the globe from Thailand to Israel to work in Israel. At first, I was kind of stumped when they said that Thai nationals were killed by Hamas in Israel, or Thai nationals were taken hostages in Israel. I thought, what in the world are people from Thailand doing in Israel? But actually, they knew it was so wonderful working in Israel that they came halfway around the globe to work there. And as a practical matter now, since Israel can no longer trust the Palestinians, those jobs are going to be opened up to people around the world, and not enough people know that, right? Be they people from India, which is a booming country in its own right, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, Kenya, Malawi. They are coming from around the world to replace the Palestinian workers who were fortunate enough to have jobs in Israel. And by the way, those Gaza citizens who worked in Israel were making far more money than your average person in the Arab world is making. That they just lucked out that they were near enough to Israel and they could grab these good jobs. And now that they kicked them away by killing so many Israelis, they are going to be replaced by other people all around the world. In one thing that I think has not been publicized anywhere near enough, there are talks of 25,000 people from Ecuador who may come to Israel to work. Think about that. The Gazans think they're so put upon that they have to kill the Israelis, chop off their heads, chop off the heads of children, and meanwhile, people in Ecuador are coming halfway around the world, possible plans of taking 25,000 Ecuadorians living or to live in Israel and take those jobs. That's something that every American should know. They don't know it because the American press is not covering it. They're allowing people to believe that, oh, those poor Gazans. They don't realize that people from Thailand or Ecuador or the southern part of Africa would move halfway around the world, goodbye to my families, to be in heaven, to work in Israel. By the way, there's another item that ought to be pointed out with regard to how well the Arabs in Israel have it. Not long ago, there were efforts made for a two-state solution. Bad idea, but nevertheless, they talked about doing it. And at the time, when they talked about it, they thought, okay, in this area of land which we call Israel, we're going to have some of that land be Israel and some of that land be Palestine. And so people don't have to be offended. The Israelis living in what would become Palestine would move to Israel, and the Palestinians living in what would become Israel will move to Palestine. Seemed, at first blush, kind of a common sense thing. You know who screamed bloody murder? The Palestinians who were going to have to move to Palestine and leave Israel. Because when push came to shove, they know that their children would be a lot freer, get a lot better education, and be a lot more economically well off living in Israel than they would in Palestine. Palestine would probably become another state like Gaza, kind of a crooked state in which whatever leadership they vote for takes the foreign aid and keeps it. By the way, some of you older people, I don't know how old the chair is, remember Yasser Arafat, who many years ago was running Gaza. Apparently his ancestors now, they got out. They're living in Paris. They don't want to live in Gaza. They're living in Paris, high on the hog, with all the money that Yasser Arafat managed to make off the foreign aid the West was sending to Gaza. So in any event, I would ask the press to report a little bit about these land swaps, even that's kind of an old story, and in a news story, point out all the people from around the world who would like to live in Israel and replace the Palestinians who kicked away the great jobs that they had in Gaza, and particularly pay attention to what's going on in Ecuador and how many people from Ecuador are going to come halfway around the world to be grateful to have the jobs that the Palestinians kicked away who were living in Gaza at this time on the beautiful Mediterranean Sea. Now, the next thing we want to talk about, and I don't think has been adequately addressed, we reported on the tax bill yesterday. And I'm not sure you could call it a major bill. There were good things in the bill and bad things in the bill, as you can imagine, because it was part of negotiations between Republicans and Democrats. As I mentioned, the child tax credits probably have an element of welfare in them, which is bad. On the other hand, they did go to the middle class, and it was one of the few things that we don't phase out and say, because you're making $60,000 a year, we're going to take them away from you, we're going to punish you for working or punishing to get married. But there was another provision in there that I really disliked, even though I voted for the bill, because overall the positives outweighed the negatives. But it's a provision that was only in there because the press corps does not highlight it. And that's low-income housing tax credits. It's a little bit of a boring topic, but I asked the chair to indulge me a little bit. There are a variety of ways in which the federal government, it's none of their business to do it, by the way, but in which the federal government tries to provide low-income housing for people. And one is by giving a low-income housing tax credit to property developers of low-income housing. Now, we tweaked that credit for only a 2-year period and only a certain type subset of that credit yesterday in the bill. But people ought to, or the press corps ought to talk a little bit about these credits, because I don't think that they would survive the light of day or survive appropriate attention by the mainstream media. My problem with them, in addition to my problem with all federal mucking around in low-income housing, particularly low-income housing that's not for the elderly. For the elderly, I guess I can say positive things about it. For the disabled, I can say positive things about it. But the low-income housing tax credit means that when the federal government gets involved, a huge beneficiary is, quite frankly, well-off property developers. And so you understand what happens when developers take advantage of the low-income housing tax credit. They get a credit equal to 9% of the total cost for a 10-year period. Because there's a time value of money, it means that when they build low-income housing, the government pays for 70%. In other words, if I'm a well-off property housing developer, the government gives me 70% of the cost of that building, and I only have to put in 30%. At a minimum, there are, I'm told, places around the country where the state and local governments give them further incentives. Obviously, the idea, and I think a lot of these people, by the way, make campaign contributions. I think they're politically well connected, as you can imagine, to take advantage of such a generous credit. But in any event, it is a very complicated thing. You might say, what happens if the property developer does not have income tax to offset with the credit? And what happens is then they sell the credits to somebody else, frequently banks. So we not only have beneficiaries of what is supposed to help with the low-income people go to an incredibly generous subsidy to property developers, but banks are able to use the credit to show the FDIC or whoever, the banking regulators, that they are socially conscious, so they get a little bit of a benefit there as well. There are some anecdotes I've heard about this. Oh, and by the way, an accounting firm puts out an explanation of the tax credit. Tax credit by itself kind of makes your eyes glaze over. People wonder where paperwork comes from. The accounting firm that puts it out devotes 1,400 pages to an explanation for a credit. Even if there are other things you like, you should know if Congress is passing a program that takes 1,400 pages to explain, you know it's a bad program. And I think, by the way, it's complicated on purpose, so you confuse congressmen into voting for it. Because the government, not surprising, is paying for 70% of the cost of that apartment in general costs 30% more than an apartment would if it was built in the private sector without having the government muck around. So right off the bat, there's a big problem there. I know a property developer in Wisconsin who builds normal apartments, not aimed for low-income housing, not taking advantage of the generous credit. He tells me that the people with the low-income housing credit frequently outbid him for the land because the government's paying for 70% of the cost. Think about that. So if you want somebody to build apartments for the middle class, they can't get the prime location in town because the low-income credit is so generous that the person with the low-income housing will always outbid them. Another thing that happens when the government pays 70% of the cost of something, you have a nicer apartment, because after 20 years it's no longer low-income housing, a nicer apartment that people who don't have low-income housing have. And I've heard that complaint. I've heard people looking for new apartments and they find the nicest apartments in town they're not eligible for because they're the low-income housing units, which of course is what happens when the government pays for 70% of the cost of the unit. Not to mention there's the possibility for crookedness there, because if the government is paying 70% of the cost of anything, doesn't it encourage your subcontractors and what to jack up the prices because the government's paying for 70%? Of course it is. Now, this new increase in generosity in the low-income housing credit will expire in 2 years. They were able to get this thing through because naive people thought it was, who first of all thought it was the federal government's business to get involved in all, but nice people felt that the low-income housing tax credit benefited low-income people. They didn't realize it was a payoff to well-connected property tax developers. But if the press corps would wake up and write articles about this program, it would not survive the next 3 or 4 years. The only reason this program, which I consider to be about the most questionable part of the Internal Revenue Code, the only reason this thing is able to survive is because the slumbering press corps does not report on it. Now, there are a lot of programs on it. I don't like to highlight one nonprofit, but the Cato Institution has a great expose of what this program out there, if you want to find it on the internet. It's about 5 years old, but it's as accurate today as it was then. And if we talk about it, if you think the Internal Revenue Code is used by well-heeled people to get things in there, this is for you. And I strongly encourage the press corps to pay attention to the low-income housing tax credits. And like I said, it's a waste of taxpayer money. And worst of all, I'm the type of congressman who tries to look out for the average guy. These are provisions stuck in the Internal Revenue Code to benefit the well-off, the politically well-connected, and just because they put a kind of a nice-sounding title to it, low-income housing tax credit, you think they're looking out for the poor. They're looking out for the well-heeled property tax developer. So there's the second thing that our slumbering press corps should pay attention to. The third thing I want to talk about is an issue we've talked about many times before, but since I last addressed the chair, we released the figures on the number of people coming across the border. Now, I had guessed the last time I was up here that for the first time ever, we'd have over 300,000 people a month crossing the border. I remind people that back in the days of President Trump, that number was, depending upon the year or depending on the month, around 10 or 12,000. So we've gone from 10 or 12,000 people a month crossing our border, what we'll call illegally, because I think they're asking for asylum they don't deserve, 10 or 12,000 to 300. This is just shocking. Whenever I look at it, I can't believe it. 370,000. So we've gone up about 30 times as many people crossing into the United States as we did 3 years ago. The American public ought to be absolutely appalled. And we have an administration, Joe Biden, who fumbles around and says, well, I guess maybe we should do something about that. Maybe Congress should meet with me and we should try to do something. The American public should know the fact that we've gone up from 12,000 to 370,000 has nothing to do with Congress. It's the inability of the Biden administration to want to enforce the law. This is something they want by design. They want, instead of 12,000 people coming here illegally every month, they want 370,000. And if they went back to the policies of President Trump, we are told just to stay in Mexico situation, we would reduce this number by 85%. Now, it'd still be over 50,000. We still have more work to do. It'd still be a disaster. But he could just, by the signing of a piece of paper, he could knock that 370,000 figure back down to 40 or 50,000. Pointing out other things that are going on that are the mainstream media is not doing a very good job on. In the 370,000, there were about, one more time, about 12,000 unaccompanied minors. Now, there's another thing that's gone up exponentially under this administration, and the mainstream media purports to care when families are separated. I'll tell you, when you have 12,000 people cross the border without the parents, that's family separation. Those kids should be turned around and sent back to their parents or contact their parents. Now, we don't do anything like that at all. If the child shows up and they've got a piece of paper on their T-shirt that says, deliver me to Uncle Joe in Portland, Oregon, We buy them the plane ticket. We deliver them to Uncle Joe. We don't do DNA testing to see if it really even is Uncle Joe. It's a recipe for human trafficking when people want to take advantage of young children, but the press allows it to happen. Under President Biden, they screamed about family separation when it was only a very temporary thing for a very small number of kids. Now you have 10, 11, 12,000 kids a month, no big deal. We don't talk about it. Okay. The next thing to remember is that even once these kids are placed with sponsors, the Biden administration does not follow up to see where they are. And estimates vary, but somehow, I think somewhere between 30 and 80,000 kids we've lost track of. In other words, we let 15, 14, 12-year-olds in the country, and after a few months, we don't even know where they are. So I would strongly encourage the press corps to report on the volume of people who came here in December. Even I, who am as opposed to the Biden administration as anybody, I was expecting that number to come in 310,000, 320,000. Instead, 370,000. They blew away the old record by about 50,000, more than I ever would have dreamed. And we have to remember, in addition to all the people coming into our country, changing our country, committing crimes in our country, in addition to that, we have a situation in which they are bringing drugs in the country. And we have to remember that over 100,000 of our citizens are dying every year from illegal drug overdoses. You would think anybody who cared about this 100,000, I know there's some hard-hearted people, they took the drugs themselves, we don't care. Apparently the Biden administration is in that category because they aren't doing much to stop it. But you would think any normal president, just to save the 100,000 lives and prevent all these drugs from coming to the country, would close the border on that alone. But the press, again, does not report it. I was old enough to remember the Vietnam War. In 12 years in the Vietnam War, 57,000 American troops died. And it was reported constantly and should have been reported constantly. That was news when our troops were dying in Vietnam. 57,000 over 12 years. Now we have 108,000 every year dying from illegal drug overdoses. It happens in county after county, and it's like swept under the rug because the mainstream media doesn't want to embarrass the Biden administration, so we don't talk about 108,000 people a year dying. And of course, any effort made to close the border, any effort made to prevent it? No. No effort made to prevent it. It's a story that every local newspaper in the country, they're easy to find, they ought to be reporting not only the number for America as a whole, they ought to be pointing out how many people died, say, in the state of Wisconsin or wherever their state the paper is in. They should report how many people were dying in the county, and you will find out it is, I would think, for almost every county in the state, in the country, probably every county in the state. If you added up all the murders and all the car accidents together, the number of people who are dying of illegal drugs is way over that total. But we put car accidents with fatalities in the paper all the time because it's a tragic thing. People like to read about it or want to be informed about it. We put, obviously, local murders in the paper all the time. 108,000 Americans dying every year with spouses, with parents, with children. Let's sweep it under the rug, says the mainstream media. I'll tell you, if you put that in there, people would pay attention to those stories. Next issue that I don't think has been covered enough, and I'll talk about more next week, but we had a committee hearing on my subcommittee, one more committee hearing on wokeness in the military. Our current General Brown, who was previously head of the Air Force and now head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, prior to coming in the Joint Chiefs of Staff, publicly said that he wanted to reduce the number of officers in the military from 67% white men down to 43% white men. I walk around my district and I ask average people. I said, do you know the most important member of the military in the country has said his public goal is to reduce the number of white officers in the military from 67% to 43%? Almost nobody knows. The rest of the people are shocked. I told this to a Vietnam veteran who fought in Vietnam. I thought he was going to break down and cry right there when he found out what was happening to our military. They have taken the single most important agency in the United States and they run it like it's some stupid community college where it doesn't matter who we promote, where we don't have to pay attention to merit. Who cares? I can go to a cocktail party and brag about how many Hispanics or how many Asians or how many Native Americans are in the military. I no longer brag about how good my military is, how strong it is. I brag about how diverse it is. The press does not know what's going on here. And in my committee, there were inferences that we also were playing games with who gets into our military academies, West Point, Air Force Academy, Annapolis. Implication, and I nominate for those people like all Congress would do every year, but testimony was they're putting thumb on the scale as to who gets into these. It's just offensive. It's mirrored what goes on in other parts of the country. They pay people $190,000 a year to be diversity experts, to say, oh, this person is registered as this person's registered as that. I believe when they do it like they do in the private sector and have been doing this for 50 years. You self-identify, so we keep this fiction going that if you're 1/4 Peruvian, that you're a protected minority, you bring a diverse view of the world. I don't know why, if somebody has a grandmother who's Peruvian and grew up in Silver Spring, Maryland, you have a unique view of the world, and it's important to give you preferences to get promotion in the military, but that's apparently how we're operating right now. But in any event, all of the American public should be aware of that. If our military is not #1 in the world, we're going to be in big trouble, baby. One of the only reasons why we are #1 in the world is because we do have the strongest military of the world. And to begin to say our promotion should no longer be based on merit, but should be based on looking around and finding somebody from, I don't know, South Africa or whatever, is preposterous. Now, I'll remind the chair one more time that we're adding a new minority group to be given preferences to right now. President Biden wants North Africans and Middle Eastern people, if you draw a line from Morocco all the way to Iran, he wants them considered a special group who is in need of protection as well. So this will mean that if somebody immigrates here from, say, Egypt, and President Biden gets what he wants, they will also be considered a special case and need a special protection and being given preference over the native-born. It's so divisive. Not only do you not have the best people necessarily getting the job, but it's so divisive because you are teaching our military rather than you're one. We're all one unit. We're all American. You're taking the military and say you should walk around with a chip on your shoulder. You're a Hispanic American. You're an African American. You're a Native American. You're an Asian American. You're a Middle Eastern American. And just the beginning of the end. I strongly hope when we come to the appropriations bill, and we made some progress, not as much progress as we wanted in the authorizing bill, but I hope that our team, when it comes to the appropriations bill, removes all of these horrible DPI positions. Our military, a lot of people tell us it's underfunded. I'm not sure that's true, but people tell us that to pay $190 grand a year for these people is, quite frankly, ridiculous. Now, and it's something that should be reported in the mainstream media. My fifth story that we're going to cover today that the mainstream media is going to not pay attention to is we had a prayer breakfast earlier this morning in the Capitol. In the past, we had that prayer breakfast outside the Capitol. We'd take a bus a mile away or rent something in a hotel. Today, we did it right here in the Capitol, which is fine, saved a few bucks, that was good. And President Biden came over, gave a little speech, which was good. But the main speaker was the chaplain of the Senate. And the chaplain of Bennett was very animated, gave quite a long sermon. But it was an interesting sermon because I believe he called for a fast of all Americans of once or twice a week. It wasn't a full fast. I think you could drink water. The fast would end every day at 3 o'clock. But nevertheless, I thought it was interesting that Reverend Black from the U.S. Senate, who claimed there are a lot of senators or members of the Senate, I think maybe he was mentioning staff too, who fasted frequently. And of course, he quoted several Bible verses in both the Old and New Testament in which the Israelis fasted. Jesus' disciples, after he left, were going to fast. I thought it was interesting that we had such a student of the Bible that the chaplain of the Senate, who's been here since 2003, was calling for fasts. I think it's something interesting and ought to be in your local newspaper if you want to know what's going on around here. I mean, it was a prayer breakfast. A significant number of U.S. senators and congressmen attended. The President of the United States attended. Wouldn't you think they'd cover it? I bet if I look in the mainstream newspapers tomorrow, the Washington Post, the New York Times, blah, 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 the Milwaukee Journal in my area, they will not cover the fact that the longtime chaplain in the U.S. Senate called for a fast. So those are 5 stories that have been underreported. We will ask if there are any members of the mainstream media that they see whether their newspapers covered them. And if the stories are even a little bit old, doesn't mean it shouldn't be in there. To me, if you're a mainstream newspaper, a citizen who reads you every day should be informed. And every one of these 5 issues, I think somebody who reads the Washington Post, the Philadelphia Inquirer, if that's still around, the Milwaukee Journal, would not know these 5 issues. I'm going to go through them again. The degree to which people all around the world are looking to replace these Palestinians as far as doing work in Israel, the horribleness, the waste of the low-income housing tax credits, which would not survive the mainstream media paying attention to it, what's going on at the border, the degree to which in December we just blew away any totals of people coming across here, and the degree that we have to do something, the wokeness in military, that's the 4th issue, the degree to which the current head of the Joint Chiefs overtly is saying that he does not want the best people running the military if they happen to be white, and that the chaplain of the Senate was such a Bible-believing guy that he called on the congressmen and senators who are there today to begin to fast, and he actually told us that a lot of the U.S. senators are already fasting. So I'd like to thank the chair for indulging me, and I would like to yield back, I guess. That's it? Change in plan?
The chair lays before the House a message.
To the Congress of the United States. Pursuant to the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, 50 United States Code 1701 et sec, IEEPA, the National Emergencies Act, 50 United States Code 1601 et sec, Section 212F and Section 215A of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, 8 United States Code 1182F, and 8 United States Code 1185A, and Section 301 of Title III United States Code, I hereby report that I have issued an executive order declaring a national emergency to deal with the threat posed by the situation in the West Bank, including in particular high levels of extremist settler violence, forced displacement of people and villages, and property destruction. Such actions constitute a serious threat to the peace, security, and stability of the West Bank and Gaza, Israel, and the broader Middle East region, and undermine the foreign policy and national security objectives of the United States. I find that these actions constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States, and I have declared a national emergency to deal with that threat. The order authorized the blocking of property and interests in property of any foreign person determined by the Secretary of State in consultation with the Secretary of the Treasury, or the Secretary of the Treasury in consultation with the Secretary of State. I, to be responsible for or complicit in, or to have directly or indirectly engaged or attempted to engage in actions including directing, enacting, implementing, enforcing, or failing to enforce policies that threaten the peace, security, or stability of the West Bank. I, to be responsible for or complicit in, or to have directly or indirectly engaged or attempted to engage in planning, ordering, otherwise directing, or participating in certain actions, including acts of violence or threats of violence targeting civilians, efforts to place civilians in reasonable fear of violence, property destruction or seizure or disposition of property by private actors affecting the West Bank. I, to be or have been a leader of or official of certain entities that have engaged in or whose members have engaged in such activities. IV, to have materially assisted, sponsored, or provided financial, material, or technological support for, or goods or services to, or in support of any person blocked pursuant to the order. Or V, to be owned or controlled by, or to have acted or purported to act for or on behalf of, directly or indirectly, any person blocked pursuant to the order. The order also authorizes the blocking of property and interest in property of any foreign person determined by the Secretary of State in consultation with the Secretary of the Treasury to have committed or have attempted to commit, to pose a significant risk of committing, or to have participated in training to commit acts of terrorism affecting the West Bank. In addition, the order suspends the entry into the United States of any non-citizen determined to meet one or more of the above criteria. The order authorizes the Secretary of the Treasury, in consultation with the Secretary of State, to take such actions, including the promulgation of rules and regulations, and to employ all powers granted to the President by IEEPA as may be necessary to carry out the purposes of the order. It directs the Secretary of State, in consultation with the Secretary of Homeland Security, to implement the order as it applies to visas. It directs the Secretary of Homeland Security, in consultation with the Secretary of State, to implement the order as it applies to the entry into the United States of non-citizens. All executive departments and agencies of the United States are directed to take all appropriate measures within their authority to implement the order. I am enclosing a copy of the executive order I have issued. Signed sincerely, Joseph R. Biden, Jr., the White House, February 1st, 2024.
Referred to the Committee on Foreign Affairs and ordered printed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House does now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until noon on Monday next for morning hour debate.